The last thing Ilara Vance remembered about being 17 was the smell. Not the fire, though the fire came later. Not the sound of metal twisting or glass breaking, though she would hear both of those things in her sleep for the next 10 years without fail. What she remembered first, what hit her before everything else, was the smell of her father's cologne mixed with gasoline and October air. Strange, the things a mind holds onto when everything else is falling apart. It was a Tuesday. Her father, Marcus Vance, had been a prosecutor for 22 years. The kind of man who wore the same watch every day and kept his promises and genuinely believed that the law was a shield ordinary people could actually use. Ilara had grown up watching him prepare cases at the kitchen table while her mother hummed in the next room and the whole house smelled like coffee and safety. She did not know at 17 that a man named Silas Vane existed. She did not know that her father had spent the last 8 months building a case that would bring down one of the most powerful criminal networks in the city. She did not know that someone had decided Marcus Vance needed to be silenced before the trial date. She only knew that they were driving home from her school play. Her mother was laughing about something. Her father was tapping the steering wheel. And then the road disappeared. The car went off the bridge so fast that Ilara's body didn't understand what was happening until the water came up through the door. She remembered hands, her father's hands, pushing her toward the window. She remembered her mother's voice saying her name once, clearly, and then not saying anything again. She remembered a figure standing on the bridge above. A man in a dark coat, looking down. Their eyes met through the cracked windshield. She was screaming. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a cigarette. He lit it. He watched. He walked away. Ilara survived because her father used the last of his strength to push her clear of the wreckage before the car sank. She pulled herself onto the riverbank alone, 17 years old, soaking, and completely silent because she had screamed everything out of herself already. She lay there in the mud and stared at the dark water that had swallowed her entire world. And she made a decision that would take 10 years to keep. She was going to find the man on that bridge. And when she found him, she was going to make sure he could not walk away from her a second time. She pressed her face into the cold mud and breathed. Then she got up. She was alone. But she was standing. And that was enough to begin. Nobody builds themselves from nothing without leaving blood on the floor. Ilara left a great deal of blood on the floor over the next 10 years. Not the visible kind. The kind that comes from waking up at 4 in the morning to study after a 12-hour hospital shift. The kind that comes from eating alone in break rooms and skipping holidays and saying no to everything that wasn't the goal. She changed her last name in the first year. Not to hide. To protect. Her father's name had been enough to get him killed. She would carry it inside her where no one could use it as a target, and she would build a new name on top of it like armor. She became Dr. Ilara Vance. Cold. Precise. Unreachable. Her mentor at St. Jude's Medical Center was Dr. Eris Okafor. 60 years old, silver-haired, with the calm eyes of a man who had seen enough death to stop being afraid of it. He found Ilara in her second year of residency standing alone in the scrub room at 2 in the morning, practicing suture technique on a piece of foam with the focused expression of someone defusing a bomb. "You practice like you're angry at something," he said. "I practice like I intend to be the best," she replied without looking up. He watched her for a moment. "Those are not always different things," he said. Then he walked away. But the next morning, he requested her on his surgical team. And the morning after that. And every morning for the next 4 years. Dr. Okafor taught her things that textbooks could not. He taught her that the body tells the truth even when the patient lies. That a surgeon's job is not to judge the person on the table but to preserve the life inside them. That the moment you bring your personal feelings into the operating room, you stop being a doctor and start being something else entirely. Ilara listened carefully. She filed every lesson away. And quietly, privately, in the locked room of herself that Dr. Okafor never had access to, she also kept the other thing. The memory of a man on a bridge. The cold dark eyes looking down at her through a cracked windshield. The sound of a cigarette being lit while her mother's voice said her name for the last time. She became the best cardiac surgeon at St. Jude's by 27. The board called her brilliant. Patients called her cold. Colleagues called her the Ice Queen, and she accepted this with a slight nod of someone who has been called worse and built themselves out of it. She had no close friends. She had no relationship that lasted longer than the time it took the other person to realize she was somewhere else even when she was in the room. She had her work, her skill, and her secret. She told herself it was enough. Then came the Tuesday in October, exactly 10 years after the bridge, when a name appeared on her patient board that turned her blood to ice water. Bed 402. Silas vein. Aortic aneurysm. Critical. Ilara stood at the nurse's station and read that name 3 times. Her face did not change. Her hands did not shake. She had trained them not to for exactly this kind of moment without ever knowing what this kind of moment would actually look like. She picked up the file. She walked down the hall. She pushed open the door of room 402. And she looked at the man who had watched her parents die. He was smaller than she remembered. That was the first thought. Ridiculous, almost, given the circumstances. But 10 years of carrying a man in her memory had made him enormous, had made him into something larger than human, the way childhood fears always outgrow the real thing. The man in bed 402 was just a man. Silas Vane. 54 years old. Gray at the temples. Thinner than the silhouette on the bridge had been, the illness already eating at him from the inside. He had the look of someone who had spent decades being powerful and was only now, in this white room with machines attached to his chest, beginning to understand that power had an expiration date. He was afraid. She could see it clearly. Not the performed fear that people put on for sympathy, but real fear. The kind that lives in the eyes and doesn't know how to hide itself. Good, said the 17-year-old girl in the back of Ilara's mind. The one who had lain in the mud on a riverbank. But be afraid. Mr. Vane, Ilara said. Her voice was what it always was in a patient room. Steady. Professional. A voice that gave nothing away because it had been built specifically for that purpose. I'm Dr. Vance. I'll be your surgeon. Silas looked at her with those cold dark eyes she had memorized from below, and she waited for it. The flicker of recognition. The crack in the surface. Something. Nothing came. He didn't know her. Of course he didn't know her. She had been a screaming girl in a sinking car. She had been a loose end that the river was supposed to tie up permanently. He had walked away from her the way people walk away from things they consider finished. They tell me you're the best, Silas said. His voice was rough from the oxygen tube. I need the best. You have a type A aortic aneurysm, Ilara said, opening his file. She kept her eyes on the pages because looking at his face required more of the controlled stillness than even she could maintain indefinitely. Without surgical repair within the next 72 hours, the probability of rupture is above 80%. And with surgery, survival rate in my hands is 91%. She closed the file. Those are the best odds available to you anywhere in this country. Silas let out a long breath. Something in his shoulders dropped, the physical surrender of a man who has been carrying dread and has just been given a narrow ledge to stand on. Then you're my doctor, he said. Ilara looked at him then. Directly. For the first time. She let herself look at the face that had been the last thing her parents' killer saw before he walked away satisfied. Yes, she said quietly. I am. She walked out of room 402 and stood in the empty hallway with her back against the wall, and her eyes on the ceiling and her hands flat at her sides. A passing nurse glanced at her and looked away quickly because Dr. Vance standing still in a hallway was not something you interrupted. Ilara breathed. She had waited 10 years for this moment. She had imagined it in 100 different ways. And now that it was here, standing 5 feet away from her in a hospital bed with machines monitoring his heartbeat, she realized something that no amount of planning had prepared her for. She had the power now. The question was what she was going to do with it. The official file on Silas Vane was clean. That was the first thing Ilara noticed when she took it home that night and spread it across her kitchen table under the bright overhead light. She had been accessing patient files late at night for years, cross-referencing, researching, preparing for surgeries with the obsessive thoroughness that made her the surgeon she was. Nobody would think twice about Dr. Vance taking work home. The official file said, business consultant. Semi-retired. No criminal record. Emergency contact, a woman named Petra Vane, listed as sister. No criminal record. Ilara stared at those 3 words for a long time. She had spent 10 years assuming Silas Vane was a known quantity. A visible name in the criminal world her father had been prosecuting. She had done searches over the years, careful ones from public terminals at libraries in other cities, never from her own devices. She had found fragments. A name mentioned in connection with a closed case. A company dissolved shortly after her father's death. Nothing concrete. Nothing that pointed directly at the man on the bridge. Because the man on the bridge had never been the top of the chain. She understood this now, looking at the clean file. Silas Vane was a weapon. Expensive, precise, and completely untraceable because weapons don't leave fingerprints. People who hire weapons do. And the person who had hired Silas Vane to silence Marcus Vance was someone who had never once appeared in any search Ilara had done. Someone who had been close enough to her father to know exactly when and where to strike. Someone who had known the route they took home from the school play. Someone who had known which Tuesday to call in the order. Ilara turned the file over. There was a personal effects list attached, the standard inventory taken when a critical patient was admitted. Phone. A wallet. And one item that made her stop completely. Leather notebook. Initialed Zvi. Personal effects were held in the hospital safe until a patient was discharged or transferred. They could be accessed by medical staff under specific circumstances. Ilara closed the file. She sat in her quiet kitchen for a very long time. Then she made herself a cup of coffee, drank it slowly and went to bed. The next morning she accessed the hospital safe. The notebook was small. Black leather worn at the corners. She didn't open it in the safe room. She photographed every page with a secondary phone she kept for this specific possibility. The phone that had no name attached to it and connected only through a private network that a contact of her father's old investigator had set up for her 3 years ago when she told him she was getting close. She returned the notebook. She walked back to the surgical ward. She prepped for a routine procedure on another patient with the same focus she always brought. That evening, she sat down with the photographs of the notebook pages. By midnight she understood everything. By 1 in the morning, her hands were the steadiest they had been in 10 years, because now she didn't just have a patient in bed 402. She had a witness. And the name written in the back page of that notebook in small, careful letters was a name she had spoken every week of her childhood. A name attached to holidays and birthday cards and a face she had once trusted completely. Her uncle, Richard Vance. Her father's own brother had ordered his death. Dr. Okafor found her in the scrub room the next morning. He didn't say anything at first. He stood beside her at the sink and washed his hands with the slow thoroughness of a man who has learned that the best conversations start with silence. Ilara kept her eyes on the water. "Your hands are shaking," he said finally. She looked down. They were. Barely by any normal standard. Invisible to anyone who hadn't watched those hands perform surgery for 4 years and memorized every variation of their stillness. But Dr. Okafor had, and they were. And there was no point pretending otherwise to a man who had been reading people across operating tables for 3 decades. "I'm fine," she said. "You're not fine." He turned off the tap. Bed 402. Not a question. Ilara looked at him. In 4 years she had told him nothing. She had been careful, always careful, the way her father had taught her to be careful around things that mattered. But Dr. Okafor was not a foolish man. He had the particular intelligence of someone who has watched human nature long enough to see the shapes people make around their secrets. "He's a difficult case," she said. "He's more than that to you." Dr. Okafor dried his hands and looked at her directly with those calm eyes that had seen enough to stop being surprised by anything. "I'm not going to ask you to explain it. I am going to ask you to hear me." She waited. "I have watched you become the finest surgeon I have ever trained," he said. "Not because of your technical skill, though that is extraordinary. Because you walk into every operating room and you leave yourself outside the door. Whatever you are carrying, whatever is in your life, you have always had the discipline to set it down before you pick up the scalpel. He paused. That discipline is the only reason I am letting you near that man's chest. You could assign someone else, Ilara said. I could. And he would likely die on the table because no one else here has the skill this particular surgery requires. His voice was even, factual. So I am not assigning someone else. I am standing here telling you that a doctor has no enemies. Only patients. The moment you forget that, you stop being what I trained you to be. He picked up his file from the counter. And you become something neither of us wants you to be. He walked out. Ilara stood alone in the scrub room with the water still dripping from the tap, and the weight of everything she knew pressing down on her shoulders. Doctor has no enemies. Only patients. She looked at her reflection in the steel panel above the sink. The Ice Queen looked back. Steady. Controlled. Professional. Behind those eyes, a 17-year-old girl in a ditch was still screaming. Ilara straightened her coat. She picked up her files. She walked to room 402. She came to his room at 11 that night. Not as his doctor. She had already done her final pre-surgical assessment 2 hours earlier with a nurse present and everything documented. This visit was not in any file. This visit was the conversation she had been building toward for 10 years without knowing exactly what she would say when she got there. The ward was quiet. The night nurses were at the far station. Ilara walked down the corridor in the specific unhurried way of a doctor who belongs in every part of the building at every hour and therefore attracts no attention anywhere. She pushed open the door of room 402. Silas was awake. She had expected this. Men facing major surgery rarely sleep well the night before. He was lying on his back staring at the ceiling with the expression of someone doing mental accounting, adding up a life and unsure whether the total was worth saving. He turned his head when she entered. He didn't seem surprised to see her. Perhaps he had been expecting something, some final medical detail, some last clarification. His cold dark eyes found her face in the dim room. "Dr. Vance," he said. "My name isn't Vance," she said. She pulled the chair close to his bed and sat down. Not the professional distance she maintained in every other interaction with this man. Close. The distance of someone who needs to be seen clearly. "My name is Ilara Marcus," she said. "My father was a prosecutor named Marcus Vance. And 10 years ago, you stood on the Harlow Bridge and watched his car go into the river. You watched me inside that car. And then you lit a cigarette and you walked away." The room went very still. Silas Vane looked at her. And this time she watched it happen. Slowly, like a photograph developing in real time, recognition assembled itself behind his eyes. The girl in the car, 17 years old, screaming, alive when she should not have been. He said nothing for a long time. "You became a doctor," he said finally. His voice was strange. Not the voice of a man making an observation. The voice of a man confronting something he hadn't accounted for. "I became your surgeon," Ilara said. "The surgery is in 9 hours. I am the only person in this hospital with the skill to get you off that table alive." She looked at him steadily. "I need you to understand that I know exactly who you are. And I need you to understand something else." "What?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Your notebook. The name in the back." The monitors registered a change in his heart rate. She watched the numbers climb on the screen behind him with the clinical attention of a doctor, even in the middle of the most personal conversation of her life. "My uncle," she said. Silas closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something had shifted. The fear was still there. But underneath it, something else had surfaced. Something that looked, unexpectedly, like exhaustion. "He told me your father was dirty," Silas said. "That he was taking payments. That the prosecution was corrupt. That eliminating him was the only way to stop a worse man from walking free." He paused. "I believed him. I did the job. And then 2 months later I found out everything he told me was a lie. And by then it was too late to matter." Ilara sat with this information in the silent room. "You found out," she said carefully. And you did nothing. What was I going to do? Walk into a police station? He looked at her with those dark eyes. Your uncle has 3 judges and a federal official in his pocket. Your father tried to fight him honestly. You saw how that ended. The monitors beeped steadily. I have the notebook, Ilara said. Silas looked at her sharply. I photographed every page, she continued. Every name, every transaction, every record you kept for 10 years. I have it all. She leaned forward slightly. I don't need you to testify. I don't need you to be brave. I need you to survive the surgery tomorrow so that when the evidence is presented you are alive and locatable and cannot be called a dead man's lie. A long silence. And if I don't survive? He asked. Lara stood. She straightened her coat. She looked at him one final time from the professional distance she had abandoned at the start of this conversation and was now, deliberately, reclaiming. Then you don't survive, she said simply. But that will be medicine. Not me. She walked to the door. Dr. Vance, he said behind her. He stopped. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. But I am. Ilara stood at the door with her hand on the frame and her back to the man who had watched her parents die. 9 hours, she said. Get some rest. She walked out into the quiet corridor and stood with her eyes closed for 10 seconds. Exactly 10. Then she walked back to her office and began the final preparation for the most important surgery of her career. The operating theater was its own world. Ilara had always believed this. The moment the doors swung shut behind you, everything outside ceased to exist in any practical sense. Other surgeons talked about compartmentalizing, about leaving their personal lives at the door, as if it were a skill to be learned. For Ilara it had always been automatic. The OR was the one place where the screaming in the back of her mind went quiet and there was only the work. She was not certain it would work today. She scrubbed in with the focused silence her team had learned to read as a signal that this surgery required their best. Nobody chatted on Dr. Vance's table when she looked like this. The head nurse, Tomoko, who had been on Ilara's team for 3 years and knew her better than most, caught her eye once and gave her the briefest nod. See you. I'm here. Stay straight. Ilara nodded back. Silas Vane was already under when she entered. The anesthesia had smoothed away everything that made him the man from the bridge and left only a body. A failing heart inside a chest that needed repair. This was what she had to see. Only this. Commencing bypass, she said. The bypass machine took over the work of his heart and lungs with its mechanical patience, and the room moved into the particular focused rhythm of a complex surgery proceeding correctly. Ilara worked. Her hands were what they always were on this side of the door. Precise. Decisive. The best in the building. She opened his chest. She looked at his heart. It was a wreck. Years of stress and a life lived in the shadows of violence had done their work. The aneurysm was larger than the scans had suggested, the walls thin and threatening to tear at any pressure. This was going to require everything she had. Good, she thought. Let it require everything. Let there be no room for anything else. For 2 hours there wasn't. Then the monitor changed its sound. The steady beep became a long flat drone. Clamping the aorta, Ilara said. Silas Vane's heart stopped. S of a team waiting for the next instruction from their surgeon. Ilara stood over the open chest with the graft ready beside her, and the clock on the wall marking seconds in the silence. She did not reach for the graft. 1 second. She was 17 and the water was coming in through the door. 2 seconds. Her mother's voice saying her name. 3 seconds. The cigarette. The cold dark eyes looking down. 4 seconds. The footsteps walking away. 5 seconds. The explosion. The mud. The cold. 6 seconds. 10 years of a kitchen table at 4 in the morning. 10 years of blood on the floor. 10 years of building something out of nothing because it was the only way to get here. 7 seconds. Dr. Okafor's voice. Doctor has no enemies. Only patience. Seconds. Her father's voice, older, from further back. Justice isn't a shadow, Ilara. It's the light. 9 seconds. The notebook. Her uncle's name. The evidence sitting on a secure server waiting to be sent. The truth that only Silas Vane being alive could fully confirm. 10 seconds. Dr. Vance. Tomoko's voice was steady but tight. We need to move. Brain perfusion. If she let him go, she lost the only living witness to what her uncle had ordered. The evidence was strong, but a living man was stronger. The law her father had believed in needed both. If she let him go, she became the thing she had spent 10 years refusing to be. Her jaw locked. She breathed once. Scalpel, she said. The room exploded into motion. Ilara moved with a ferocity that made Tomoko blink, because this was not the controlled precision of a routine surgery. This was something beyond technique. This was a woman fighting on 2 fronts at once, one visible and one invisible, and winning both. She worked for 4 more hours. When she finally released the clamps, the room held its breath. 1 beat. Faint. 2 beats. Stronger. 3 beats. Steady. Silas Vane's heart was beating on its own. Ilara stepped back from the table. She looked at the monitors. She looked at the repaired heart visible in the chest cavity she had spent hours rebuilding, and she felt something move through her that was not triumph and was not grief, but was something she had no name for yet. She had saved him. Not because she forgave him. Not because he deserved it. But because her father's daughter did not take lives in the dark. Her father's daughter brought things into the light. She walked out of the scrub room. She tore off her mask. She stood alone in the corridor with the sound of the monitors beeping steadily behind the closed door. She pulled out the secondary phone. She typed 4 words to the contact who had been waiting for this moment for 3 years. The evidence is ready. She pressed send. Then she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes and let herself shake for exactly 30 seconds, the first time in 10 years she had allowed it, before she straightened up and walked back to the ward. 3 days after the surgery, Silas Vane was breathing without the ventilator. Ilara stood at his door and looked at him through the glass panel the way she stood at the doors of all her recovering patients, assessing, reading the small signs that the body broadcasts before the charts catch up. His color was better. His breathing was even. The surgery had done exactly what she had designed it to do. She had not been into his room since the night before the operation. She pushed the door open. He turned his head when she entered, and the look he gave her was different from any look he had given her before. Not the desperate gratitude of a man who had been given back his life, though that was there. Something more complicated. The look of a man sitting inside a debt he has no currency to pay. You could have let me go, he said. No greeting. No pretense. They were past that. I know, Ilara said. Why didn't you? She sat in the chair beside his bed. She was quiet for a moment, the way she was quiet in the or before a difficult moment, gathering everything to the center before she spoke. Because my father spent 22 years believing that the law existed for a reason, she said. He died because he believed it too loudly. I am not going to prove that he was wrong by doing what was done to him. Silas looked at the ceiling. Your uncle will know the moment those files hit the FBI's desk. Yes. He has people everywhere. He will come for you. I know that too. And you're not afraid. Ilara looked at him. I was 17 years old lying in river mud watching my world burn. I have been afraid every day since then. I'm very good at functioning while afraid. He paused. Are you going to cooperate with the investigation? A long silence. The monitors beeped. Yes, he said finally. I'm done running from what I did. I've been running for 10 years and I ended up in a hospital bed with a failing heart. He looked at her. Maybe that's the cost of what I chose. It is, she said simply. Not cruelly. Just honestly. He stood. She picked up his chart and made her notations with the focused efficiency of a doctor completing her rounds. When she set it back on the hook at the foot of his bed, she looked at him one last time. The FBI will want to speak with you when you're strong enough, she said. Your testimony combined with the notebook will be enough to open a full investigation. My uncle is not untouchable. My father proved that people who are genuinely guilty can be brought down. He just didn't get to see it finished. Her voice stayed level on that last sentence. She had practiced it for years. "You're going to finish it," Silas said. It wasn't a question. "I'm going to give it to the people whose job it is to finish it," she said. "That's what my father would have done." She walked to the door. "Rest. Eat what they bring you. Don't pull at the sutures. I'll check in tomorrow." She was almost through the door when he spoke again. "Ilara." Her first name. The first time. He stopped. "I know this doesn't change what I took from you. But I want you to know that you are the best person I have ever met. And I have met a great many people. Most of them were nothing like you." Ilara stood in the doorway with the busy corridor behind her, and the quiet room in front of her, and the particular stillness of a woman who has just been handed something she didn't expect and doesn't quite know where to put it. "I know," she said quietly. "That's the problem with people like you, Silas. You can recognize good. You just chose not to protect it." She walked out. The investigation opened on a Thursday. Ilara was in surgery when the news broke, which was where she preferred to be when the world was doing things she couldn't control. Tomoko caught her eye over the patient's chest when Ilara came out of the scrub room, and the look on the nurse's face told her it had started. Richard Vance was arrested at his home at 6 in the morning. The charges were extensive and the evidence, the notebook combined with Silas's recorded testimony and 10 years of financial records that Ilara's contact had been quietly building around the original files, was the kind of case that prosecutors dreamed about. Clean, documented, and complete. Her uncle's lawyers called it a conspiracy against a respected man. The press called it the fall of a ghost empire. Ilara said nothing publicly. She had given everything she had to the people with the authority to use it correctly. She was done speaking for now. The cost came 2 weeks later. She had known it was coming. She had known it the night she accessed the hospital safe to photograph Silas's notebook, because she had used a patient's personal effects outside of standard medical procedure, and regardless of the reason, that was a violation of hospital policy. Dr. Okafor had known something was happening. The board had questions. She sat in the review hearing with the same stillness she brought to the operating room, and she told them the truth. All of it. Her father. The bridge. Years. The notebook. Every decision she had made and why she had made it. The room was very quiet when she finished. Dr. Okafor sat at the far end of the table. He looked at her across the long distance between them with those eyes that had seen everything, and she could not read what was in them. She had spent 4 years learning to read him, and for the first time he was opaque to her. The board suspended her license pending a full review. Standard procedure. Potentially permanent, depending on the outcome of the broader investigation. She walked out of the hearing room into the corridor of the hospital she had worked in for 8 years, and she stood there for a moment looking at the walls. The smell of antiseptic and recycled air. The sounds of the ward. The things that had been her entire world. Then she walked to her office. She packed the things that were hers. Not many. A photograph of her parents that she kept face down in the bottom drawer, and had looked at every morning before she began the day. Her father's watch, which she had bought at a pawnshop years ago when she tracked down the man his murderer had sold it to. Her copy of the anatomy textbook she had clutched on the riverbank. She zipped her bag. She walked out. Dr. Okafor was waiting in the corridor. They stood facing each other for a moment. "You saved his life," Dr. Okafor said. "Yes. And you burned yours to do it." "I built something worth burning," she said. "My father would understand that." Dr. Okafor looked at her for a long time. Then he did something she had never seen him do in 4 years. He put his arms around her. Briefly. The hug of a man who is saying more than words can carry. Then he stepped back and straightened his coat and became Dr. Okafor again. "The review board is not the end of the story," he said. "I know," she said. She walked down the corridor toward the exit. People moved out of her way without knowing why. The way they always had. The particular force of a woman who knows exactly where she is going even when she is leaving everything behind. She pushed through the hospital doors into the October air. Cold and sharp, the same kind of cold as 10 years ago. The city spread out in front of her, indifferent and enormous and full of ordinary lives being lived by people who had no idea that a woman had just walked out of a building carrying the weight of a decade and the beginning of something she couldn't name yet. She stood on the steps and breathed. Then she walked forward. The letter from the review board arrived 6 months later. Ilara was living in a smaller apartment by then. Quieter neighborhood. A kitchen table where she read every morning before the city woke up. She had been consulting on cases from home. The board permitted this in limited form during the review, and she had been writing, which was new. Not articles. Not research papers. Something more personal that she had not shown anyone yet. She recognized the envelope immediately. She set it on the table and made her coffee first. She drank half of it standing at the window looking at the street below. Then she sat down and opened it. The review had found in her favor. The extraordinary circumstances, the ongoing criminal investigation, and the unambiguous outcome. Silas Vane alive and cooperating, Richard Vance facing trial, a decade-old murder confirmed and being prosecuted, had weighed heavily. Her license was reinstated with a formal notation. Dr. Okafor had submitted a 15-page letter on her behalf. She read the letter twice. Then she set it down and finished her coffee. She thought about her father at the kitchen table with his case files and his watch and his unwavering belief that the law was a shield ordinary people could use. She thought about her mother humming in the next room. She thought about a school play and a Tuesday and the particular way the light had looked on the water before everything changed. She thought about 10 seconds in an operating room. About a choice made in the specific silence between one heartbeat and the next. She thought about Silas Vane, who was in federal custody and cooperating fully, who had sent her one letter through his lawyer that she had read once and folded carefully and placed in the drawer with a photograph of her parents. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. Something more complicated and more honest. A man looking at what he had done with open eyes for the first time in a decade. It was not enough. It was also not nothing. She picked up her phone. She called Dr. Okafor. "The letter came," she said when he answered. "Was." Then his warm, quiet laugh. "I know. They called me this morning." 15 pages, she said. "You were worth 15 pages, he said. "You were worth 50. I stopped at 15 because I have other patients." She laughed. It surprised her. Real and small and entirely unplanned. The way the best laughs always are. She sat with it for a moment. "I want to come back," she said. "I know that too," he said. "Monday morning. Scrub in at 7. Don't be late." She said she wouldn't be. She sat at her kitchen table after the call with the reinstatement letter in front of her, and the October light coming through the window and the city going about its ordinary business below. She thought about the things that cost the most and what they were worth and whether the accounting ever really balanced. Didn't. She knew that. You don't balance a loss like hers. You carry it differently over time. You learn to walk with it instead of under it. You build something real with the hands you still have and you trust that the people who shaped you can see it from wherever they are. She opened her laptop. She opened the document she had been writing. She looked at the title she had given it. What the Light Does. She began to type. Not because writing it would fix anything. But because her father had believed that truth spoken clearly was the most powerful thing a person could offer the world. And because she was her father's daughter, down to the last careful word. She wrote until the coffee went cold. She drank it anyway. To everyone who has ever had to rebuild from nothing, the rebuilding is the story. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. If this story reached you, please like, share, and subscribe. Every comment you leave is the reason we keep telling stories that matter. We will see you in the next one.